I'm a political scientist, and one of my areas of focus is social movements and protest. So when I arrived at the University of Glasgow in October 2018, I was immediately interested in the demonstrations that had been occurring associated with the Scottish independence movement. I attended my first demonstration in May 2019 in Glasgow, and then I began conducting surveys in August 2019 in places such as Aberdeen, Perth, Edinburgh, and Glasgow. In the survey, we were interested in knowing why people were participating in these independence events, what organizations they had been a part of up till this point, the extent to which they identified themselves as Scottish, British, or European, and information about their demographics and their prior political involvement. One of the biggest differences between the Scottish independence movement and many other movements in the world is that the Scottish independence movement is really focused on a particular territory as opposed to a broad issue. So if you compare that to, say, the anti-war movement or the Stop Climate Change movement, these are movements which are thinking about broad, worldwide issues, or even the Me Too movement, the women's movement. These movements take on sort of broad social challenges which apply to people in many different nations. The Scottish independence movement, like other independence movements, has its primary focus on the particular territory of Scotland. And of course, there are independence movements in other places as well. Well, there's a long-standing and natural tension between social movements and political parties. And the reason for this is that political parties and social movements really, at their core, want something very different. Political parties want to win elections, and social movements want to win issues, in a sense. So the Scottish independence rallies are pushing for one issue, independence, whereas the Scottish National Party is thinking about building a program for government, and independence is only one of those issues. So it's very natural for there to be a tension between these two types of organizations, and you see these tensions all over the world. Well, interestingly, I would say that Scottish independence rallies are very focused in terms of their messages. Almost everyone that attends these rallies is really there because of the independence cause, and they really articulate that clearly. And I mean, of course, there's a few people that show up with different agendas, but I would say that that's much less the case than you would see at other kinds of rallies, like a climate change rally or a women's rights rally or an anti-war rally. Those kinds of rallies tend to attract a lot more diversity in message. The independence rallies have been fairly straightforward and disciplined in their messaging. The question is, why is it that independence rallies tend to see a lot of families and people in their middle ages and advanced years? And probably the biggest reason is that people in their 20s and 30s are tied up with other kinds of activities in their lives. They're working their first jobs. They are not yet established in their communities. They're trying to get a family started. And these kinds of barriers tend to make it harder for them to make time to be involved in activism. Usually, once people settle down in their communities and they get past that point in their lives, then it's easier to attract their involvement in activism. And this is true for the independence movement, but it's true for most social movements. That's a really good question. First of all, when you look at the anti-war movement and you look at the people who participated, there really were two big groups. And there was a younger cohort that was 18 to 27 years old. And then there was also a much bigger cohort that was, 45 to 70 years old. So there was still that missing middle of people that you're talking about. But we're also looking at differences in the issues. So the anti-war movement was dealing with a very immediate issue about people that would die or are dying today. Whereas the independence movement is dealing with an issue which is longer term, and that people are less likely to really care about until they get settled or established in their community. So if you have, so for example, young people living in Scotland are not sure that they're even going to be staying in Scotland and living their lives in Scotland. They very much may have their eyes set on London or Paris or the United States. And so the territorial issues that are addressed by the Scottish independence movement are just not as salient to young people as maybe something which is more immediate, like a war would be. Sure, I mean, imagery is extremely important for people who are not going to be at the event to look at it, or who weren't at the event to look at it and try to get a sense of what it was about and what it meant. And when you see, for example, a mile of protesters in Edinburgh, all with blue and white flags, that evokes emotions that are associated with the Scottish flag, and also communicates a level of support that the movement has. If there are a few people at an event like that, then that may send the message that not many people really care about the event. But when you see these large gatherings, you know that a lot of people really place a high priority on this issue. The flag is a very important symbol because the flag is the symbol of the nation. And so by invoking the flag, you invoke that national loyalty. One of the things I noticed that was very interesting was when I attended the rally in Aberdeen. I came upon a point in the rally where there was a counter-protest of about 50 people, and the counter-protesters had the Union Jack flag. And it's very striking how the two sets of colors come against each other. So basically, you've got two flags that are passing by one another in the crowd. And that evokes the emotions associated with these two nations. So that's very important in terms of the way that people think about who they are, their political identities are, and where their loyalties lie. So I have written 2 papers about the Scottish independence movement, and I'm in the process of trying to have one of these papers published. I'm in the process of trying to have both of these papers published. One of the papers is available on my website, and that paper is titled Multiple Political Identities and Mobilization into the Scottish Independence Movement, and that is available at www.michaeltheaney.com, and that's T as in Thomas, and then Heaney, Heaney. So that one paper is available online, and then the other paper is not online yet, but I'm in the process of trying to publish it. So what I've done is I've gone to these different rallies in Glasgow, Edinburgh, Aberdeen, and Perth, and I've conducted surveys of the participants, and I've looked at their motivations for participation and tried to look at some of the factors that encourage participation. So one of the things that I've focused on is these different types of identities that people have, Scottish identities, British identities, and European identities, and looked at the mobilizing role that they have. One of the interesting findings of the research is that Scottish identities and European identities interact in an important way for people who are mobilized into the movement. That is that when people both identify with being European and identify with being Scottish, that tends to really boost their involvement in the movement. And that is, of course, in line with the messaging that you're seeing from the Scottish National Party and the independence movement itself. The work that I'm doing is independent academic research, and I have reached out to the different independence organizations and given them copies of the study that I've done, and I'm happy to talk with them about it. But I don't work for any other organization other than the University of Glasgow. Well, one of the things that the independence movement has done has been to really demonstrate the support within Scotland for a second independence referendum. And of course, the Scottish National Party has also taken that position. So within Scotland, it's clear that many people want to see this referendum happen. However, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has said that he doesn't want to see that referendum happen. So as long as he holds that position, it's going to be very difficult to bring a referendum into force to make it happen. I think that what the independence movement should do, if it wants to try to increase the likelihood of a referendum, is once the COVID crisis has passed, begin to look more actively at ways to put pressure on politicians outside of Scotland. Because as it is right now, the independence movement places a lot of pressure on Scottish politicians, but not as much as politicians outside of Scotland. And it's those politicians that are ultimately going to hold the balance of power about when an independence referendum is held, if at all. Well, having the referendum recognized by the international community as taken as given as part of the debate, I don't think there's any serious discussion of holding a referendum that wouldn't be fully recognized by the international community. And indeed, doing something like that could very well be counterproductive to the cause. So I think that all of the discussion really makes that assumption.